And I decided it was not. It was not a viable tool because environmental crimes were outside the scope of what could be brought. You could only bring claims for very, very specific human rights atrocities. And that was too narrow, and I looked at it taking way too long. I looked at all these cases and they were filed 10 years before their opinion was written. And I thought, well, that stinks. But I'm still fascinated, right? So I immediately went to a law firm, first to repay my loans, being very frank about that part of my career. That was not an option for me. I didn't have a loan repayment program. I had a ton of debt. So went to Wilson Sonsini for that reason. I also went because they're an excellent law firm, and I got trained superbly about how to litigate, how to be a lawyer. I was in the corporate securities litigation department. It was mostly high-tech company versus high-tech company. So I was defending a high-tech company against an alleged securities violation, contract breach, you name it. Those were the kinds of things I had spent 4 years doing. And in the meantime, they let me do pro bono work. And the reason I applied to be an associate at Wilson Sonsini is because all of those 200 cases I read, I noticed that one of them said the plaintiffs were represented by Wilson Sonsini. I thought, oh my gosh, they're recruiting on my campus. I better go talk to them. And so I got an interview, and I thought, I had public interest all over my background. Why in the world would they interview me? But great, let's go for it. So they interviewed me, and then they hired me, which I couldn't believe. And so the second I accepted the offer, I called the partner in charge of that case, that human rights case that I read about, and I said, I'm starting in the fall. Meanwhile, this is August, the year before. Can I work on this case? And he laughed and said, why don't you come in a year and see if we're still working on that case? So the day after my orientation ends, a year later, I knock on his door. I'm back. Hi, do you remember me? I'd like to work on this case. And he said, well, you're in luck because we're going to trial and we need a junior associate on the case. So I was involved in the first case to deliver a verdict on crimes against humanity in the United States because of that knock on that door and because of noticing the name Wilson Sonsini in all those cases I read. That case was a really monumental case where a Pinochet-era lieutenant who was living openly in the United States was tried in civil court. We were representing family members of someone who was a murder victim. He was tried for mass murder committed in the 70s in Chile as part of the Caravan of Death, which is a notorious time in Chilean history where civilians left and right were killed simply because of their job descriptions when a coup happened. And we represented a family of someone who was brutally tortured and murdered. And we won. We won the case using this very esoteric law, the Alien Tort Statute, that same one that I thought was, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, no one's ever going to be able to use this. And I think it was very telling that it was one of the only victories ever in a jury verdict under that law. And still today, there are only a handful of examples where there's actually been a payout as a result of this type of litigation, even though we've had many, many more cases. So I continue to be interested and study the Alien Tort Statute, but I started thinking again, gosh, I wonder, if my time is better spent, instead of spending 90% of my time litigating a case on procedural motions, which is what you do as a litigator, 10% of the time is on the actual merits, the interesting human rights issues. 90% is on, do we have standing, was this motion for discovery properly brought, is it too broad, too narrow? Things like that, which are the necessary evil of litigation. So instead of doing that, should I be spending my time helping communities around the world access these mechanisms that they don't know about and that are sitting there underutilized? And I kept asking myself that question. For 4 years at Wilson Sonsini, I did that. In those 4 years, I worked on that case, brought it to trial, it went up through appeal, we won on appeal. I did a lot of asylum work pro bono, representing people seeking asylum in the United States. That was incredibly rewarding, really direct human rights work. If anyone's ever interested in doing direct human rights work, that's a great way to do it. And then I left the firm. And to give you the biggest reason why I left the firm, I think anyone would have, one of my co-counsel was a lawyer who worked with me on this Chilean human rights case, was a lawyer at his own firm in Florida where the trial took place, and he said, Natalie, we've been in trial for a month in Miami, they're stuck in this hotel, and every night we go to dinner, you keep talking about these non-judicial grievance mechanisms. You keep talking about these other avenues to bring justice, and why don't you just go do it? I'm going to give you 3 years of funding. And I said, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I'm going to take that. And I did, and I quit my job, and I started my own law firm. And it was with support of a private donor, which never happens, so don't try to follow that as career advice. It was very, very lucky, and I recognize that, so I took full advantage of it. I couldn't help it because 9/11, post 9/11 crimes were happening, so I took on a couple cases I probably shouldn't have, but I had to. I was a local counsel in a case against John Yu on behalf of Jose Padilla for the abuse and detention of that U.S. citizen. I also got involved in a couple amicus briefs to the Supreme Court on behalf of people abused post 9/11 by corporations. And I took on a significant responsibility in a case that I still litigate to this day. It's the one case I still have. I still wear the hat of law offices of me. In a case brought against Occidental Petroleum for 30 years of toxic contamination in the Peruvian Amazon, different part of the Peruvian Amazon, but very similar case. The case provides just a phenomenal counterpoint to what I'm doing now, which is that we brought the case, we filed the lawsuit in 2006. It's currently pending in the Supreme Court about where the case should be brought, whether it should be brought in Peru or the US. That's what we're fighting about right now. So my clients in Peru who are drinking contaminated water, who can't grow crops on their contaminated lands, who have all kinds of terrible diseases and cancers, have seen nothing as a result of those many, many years of litigation, which have been at great expense for everyone involved. So that was another incentive to in 2009, when the funding ended from the private donor, the agreement was done, and I said, okay, what next? What am I going to do? Am I going to look for a job, or am I going to create my own? And I looked around and said, you know, no one's doing this work. No, still no one is doing this work on these non-judicial grievance mechanisms, so I had to do it. And I applied for a grant from Echoing Green, and I got the Echoing Green funding, which was just enough to make you jump ship from what you were doing, but not enough to go all the way. But it's just enough to make you crazy enough to do it. And so I did it and had to find other funding immediately. And I forgot my other detour, which was while I was law offices of me, and in the year between when my funding ran out and starting Accountability Council, I did a brief stint as a consultant to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And this is one of the banks that finances all the harm, you know, that I keep mentioning. And I have an incredibly biased view of things, as you may have picked up on. So that's who my clients are. But the EBRD, they had an accountability office to accept complaints, but it was up for review. They were redesigning it to see if it could work more effectively, and they hired me to do the redesign, to go out and do consultations with people. Is this working for you? Is it not? How can we improve it? Talking with directly affected people, talking with EBRD staff, talking with the EBRD board, because it had to be politically salient for them. And in the end, we got a new mechanism up and running. And that was shortly before I was actually writing my Echoing Green application while submitting the final draft of the new rules for the new mechanism. So that was all happening at the same time. So that is how I ended up at Accountability Council. And just before I go and open it for questions, I was asked to ponder a couple of issues that I wanted to share with you. First were, what are some liberal arts skills that I use in my daily practice? One is critical thinking, and I think this is probably pretty obvious, is that in my work it's so important to draw upon everything I learned at Cornell in terms of looking beyond what's written, critically thinking and analyzing what's written, and being able to offer that critique and verbalize that critique. I particularly remember a Latin American politics class that required me to do that. Writing. Has anyone ever taken a freshman writing seminar? So, has anyone ever done more than one edit of a paper in a freshman writing seminar? What a gift. I mean, being able to get tutored like that from your TAs, from the people teaching you in a freshman writing seminar, that's such a critical skill in anything you're going to do. And being an effective communicator in writing is something I look for when I'm reviewing applications for people to work for us. And as a lawyer, it's indispensable. So that's something that Cornell definitely gave me. Working with stakeholders to accomplish a goal. I did that a lot at Cornell. So I founded this food distribution project, which was taking dining hall food and that wasn't being used and bringing it to local soup kitchens to distribute to people in need. And we had to get the dining hall staff on board, we had to get other students on board, we had to get the soup kitchens on board, and it was, you know, taking a bunch of interest groups, figuring out where the commonalities are and how to solve a problem. And absolutely something that I've learned from Cornell in many different ways, but that was one of them that I applied today. Something that I wish I had learned before starting my first job. I think the first response I had to that is that whatever job you take out of college, even if it's not the job you wanted, can absolutely be the job that serves you in the future to work on the issues you want to work on. So that job at a corporate law firm, you may have thought, oh, that's not the career path, right? That's not the way to get to working on those issues. But if you look at where in that experience can I gain skills, can I gain experience, can I gain a network of contacts that I can take with me and use toward that goal, then no job is unproductive toward your path, and no path is a dead end, importantly. A lot of people who enter corporate law firms never leave them because they can't figure out how to parlay their experience and knowledge into a left turn or a right turn into doing something else. So I think for all you would-be law students out there, you might remember that in a couple of years as something that sounds familiar. And what was the most valuable thing I did to prepare for my career? I think it's taking apart an issue from every angle and really understanding it from every angle. Really helped me to do the work I do now, because the work I do now, I need to work with the communities that I worked with in Chile when I was an undergrad doing that summer internship. I need to work with people at the World Bank's board of directors, and I started interacting with them for the first time when I was at Cornell. I started learning how to make articulate arguments to those people when I was in courses at Cornell. I learned how to do the writing that I need to do in letters to the president of the World Bank at Cornell. Those are the types of skills that prepared me for my career. My last point on that, I think, is things to prepare you for your career is networking. Be intentional about your networking. Networking is not a dirty word. A lot of people think it's kind of like a kind of sleazy word, or you're like a cheesy, glad-handing networker. That's not what I mean. I mean, be intentional about the people you cultivate in your life who are going to support your mission. Whether your mission is to work in human resources someday, or to be a banker, or to be a human rights activist, or to be an environmental or labor activist, all of those things are missions where you need to be aware of who the resources are around you that will serve you in that mission later on in life, and you're building that network right now, whether you know it or not.